Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've had a good lunch. I'm Chelsea, your host for today's session. With that, let us welcome our esteemed guest from Arbitrum, Mr. Clifton Lee. His talk, What are DAOs and How Are They Being Governed, will offer an engaging look into decentralized autonomous organizations and the evolving governance models in the blockchain space. Mr. Lee is the DAO Relations Lead at the Arbitrum Foundation and is focused on enabling and empowering delegates, projects, ecosystem partners, and other relevant stakeholders that govern the Arbitrum DAO collectively. Prior to joining Arbitrum Foundation, Mr. Lee was with the DYDX team leading on governance efforts as well. And before Web3, his career was mostly in product management in companies like Twilio. Designed with end users in mind, Arbitrum is the leading Layer 2 technology that empowers users to explore and build in the largest Layer 1 ecosystem, Ethereum. Mr. Lee, please.
Hey Chelsea, thanks for having me on. That was a very formal introduction. Thank you. Was not expecting that at all, because most of the chats and sharing sessions that I've been at are a little bit more casual. But yeah, very, very happy to be on this workshop today. So I want to share a little bit more about DAOs, how they're being governed, and I have prepared a deck. So can I just go ahead and share my screen? Let me do so really quickly. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Awesome. Let me just go into presentation mode and are you guys actually open to questions before I go on? Like because I did actually allocate some time at the end for like Q&A, but for the previous speakers, did they actually do any forms of Q&A?
No, so we can what we did previously was we asked people to send their questions in the chat and then you can just answer it afterwards
Okay.
during no how you can just play it however you want it.
Okay, cool. So let me just jump right in. So, hey everyone, again, thanks for the intro, Chelsea. I'm going to be speaking a little bit more about DAOs and how they're being governed, right? So, quick disclaimer before I start: nothing in this sharing session constitute financial advice. So, crypto is risky, DAOs are risky. So, please do your own research before you invest in anything or participate in any DAOs. And the content and views expressed in this sharing session are my own personal opinions and are not representative of the Arbitrum Foundation nor the Arbitrum DAO. So now that we have that out of the way, let's jump right into what the heck are DAOs, right? So DAOs acronym, it's an acronym, DAO, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So let's break that down. The first alphabet, D, decentralized. So what does that actually mean? So we've had quite a few like Web3 crypto speakers before this call, and I'm sure quite a few of you are actually quite aligned and attuned with what crypto and blockchain is. But you know, as a TLDR, decentralized in this sense actually means that the organization is actually not under the control of one individual entity or institution. In the sense that we don't have like a CEO or like a board of directors that are essentially controlling how the organization runs, right? It is quote unquote decentralized in a way, so much so that everyone has equal decision making and contributing power. And that is actually like a spectrum that I want to dive a little bit more into later. So you can see that I actually included this cute little speedometer icon just because like when we talk about decentralization, it's always a spectrum, right? No one DAO or no one organization I've seen out there has achieved full decentralization. So it's always a matter of how do we actually achieve a greater degree of decentralization and what are the trade-offs that we have to make in order to achieve that, whether those trade-offs are actually worth it or not. So this is essentially what decentralized, the D in the DAO stands for. It stands for decentralized. The second acronym in there is A, right? So A stands for autonomous. Autonomous simply means that the organization is self-governing. It is independent. It lives by quote unquote its own rules derived from consensus, whether it's through all the token holders or all the DAO members voting to say, okay, these are the set of rules. These are the guidelines that we all in the DAO will adhere to. And if you don't adhere to the DAO, then you risk getting expelled or like you risk getting flagged out or whatnot. So ultimately, only the token holders, only the DAO members decide what rules they are kind of governed by. And in that way, they are autonomous. And the last letter in this acronym is O. It stands for organizations, pretty straightforward. It's just this collective of individuals who join together to achieve some form of common goal or objective. So with that out of the way, why DAOs, right? Because DAOs actually allow everyday people to work with like-minded people globally without trusting a benevolent leader or team to manage funds, operations, strategy, directions, or whatnot, right? So really emphasizing on that decentralization aspect, that flat culture aspect, right? So one thing I want to point out is that, a lot of DAOs have built-in treasuries that no one essentially has the authority to assess without the approval of the collective, right? And this is because of smart contracts, right? So smart contracts essentially underpin how DAOs work, right? For most on-chain DAOs, most of the functions are actually underpinned by immutable smart contracts. And if you want to make on any actions, if you want to call any specific functions on the smart contracts, you'd have to go through a governance process, which I'll dive a little bit more into later on. But why smart contracts? It's because it enables it to it allows people to coordinate in a trustless manner, in a global manner, where rules can actually be enforced in a transparent and trustless manner. So this is actually a big appeal of why people want to work in DAOs or contribute to DAOs, because of that transparent, trustless fashion that everyone can coordinate in. Right. So let's start with, how do DAOs actually come about? How do DAOs actually form? So what I have here is more typical for general purpose layers like Arbitrum, for example, like Optimism, general purpose layers that dApps can kind of build on top of. It's also typical for DeFi platforms and projects and NFT projects and infrastructure projects. So how do they actually start, right? So more often than not, you have a central company, a software company, more often quoted as the labs team, that will build out and audit the core protocol. And then once it is at a mature stage and ready to go mainnet, then more often than not they will have like a token generation and distribution event. So it can be like an airdrop, it can be specific allocations. So airdrops are to the discretion of the team that's launching the token. So once the token is distributed to a wide number of holders, that's when control is more or less decentralized, right? And then control of the core protocol will then be handed over to token holders, right? And the DAO itself is formed that way as a collective of all the token holders. So this is how a typical DAO comes about, right? But we do have quite a few innovative other ways that DAOs can come about, right? So there isn't like a set quote unquote playbook that says, okay, in order to form a DAO, you have to do this, right? So quite a few interesting experiments on how DAOs have come about actually emerged from 2021 all the way to even now, right? So one of the more famous ones is Constitution DAO, right? And this is just like a group of people that wanted to come together and purchase the one-of-one copy of the United States Constitution. So they actually all said, hey, let's buy the Constitution. The Constitution is such an important document that it shouldn't be in the hands of any one individual or organization or entity. So the Constitution DAO was born, and all of these individuals actually participated in this like GoFundMe campaign where everyone contributed funds to a pool, and then that pool was used to bid for the purchase of the US Constitution. So unfortunately, this experiment failed because they got outbidded by Citadel. So one of the sons of the Citadel co-founder, I believe, actually outbidded the Constitution DAO. But it was an interesting experiment. It really showed how people from all around the world, not just in the United States, right? Like from all around the world could actually coordinate together in a decentralized manner to achieve a line objective, which is to purchase the Constitution, even though it failed. So this is one. The second one is Friends with Benefits. So this is essentially a social network made up of creators and builders who want to, who actually believe in the promise of a better internet. So it's a bit of a altruistic movement that people in the DAO are working on, right? So if you hold like FWB tokens, you are essentially committing to collectively fund and govern the movement to better the internet as a whole, right? So this is also a little bit more of a social DAO that formed. We also have things like Pleaser DAO, right? So Pleaser DAO is actually a collective of OG DeFi founders, or like, crypto founders in general, that have a vested interest in collecting art. So they actually formed this DAO to collectively collect more art, right? Whether it's through NFT or whether it's through traditional art. So it's just imagine like this one big I wouldn't call them team, but a collective of individuals that are purchasing art and collecting them for the interest of it, right? There are also very interesting ones like Dave DAO, right? So this is just a collective of people who have Dave in their name. So whether you're David, whether you're Dave itself, whether you're Davidson, as long as you have Dave in your name, you can be a part of this DAO, and just a way for people to connect and jam about their common interests through their names. So it doesn't matter like, what kind of, interest you have, what objective you have, as long as you share it online, maybe someone will share the same interest and then you can spark it out. And then lastly, on a more like somber note, I do want to point out that there is also a Ukraine DAO, and this is a collective of people to support the repelling of the Russian invasion. So the Ukraine DAO actually managed to amass quite a few key organizations and a lot of funds to fund the repelling, the military repelling of the Russian invasion. So again, they just formed because they wanted to achieve a collective objective of fighting off Russia, right? So doesn't necessarily have to be like money driven. Doesn't necessarily have to be a project underpinning it. As long as there is a collective mission, a DAO can kind of form. So what are some of the prominent DAOs that we have today, right? So I've separated them by industry. So we have Uniswap, for example. We have Maker, Aave, Balancer. We have GMX, and then we have DYDX. So these are some of the more prominent DeFi DAOs, right? And then we have layer 2 DAOs as well. So we have Arbitrum, we have Mantle, we have Optimism. And then on the liquid staking side of things, we have things like Lido, we have Rocket Pool, which are DAOs as well, right? And then on the NFT side, we have things like Treasure DAO, as well as Nouns DAO. So almost all the different industries, not industries, almost all the different verticals in Web3 have their own versions of DAOs, all looking to achieve a common objective. Right, and I left it out here, but on the infrastructure side, we also have things like ENS, which is pretty prominent, like Bitcoin. So yeah, I believe like whatever vertical in crypto or in Web3 that you're interested in, there's probably a DAO out there for you to explore and potentially contribute to. Right, so how do DAOs actually work? Right, so a DAO, again, core operating system are determined by smart contracts. So everything underpinning DAOs are smart contracts, and this includes like how do you actually be a member to the DAO? How does decision making actually work? How does voting actually work? How do approved actions actually get implemented? How do people actually access funds from the DAO treasury? All of these, more often than not, are actually underpinned by smart contracts. And so it's not like someone can just say, hey, I want to actually get 5 million out of the treasury. You have to actually go through a whole governance process. Everyone has to collectively vote to say yes before you can actually receive the funds. So this is a typical overview of how governance works. So it more often than not starts off in the governance forum. So a lot of DAOs, most DAOs in fact have their own forums, whether it's on Discourse, whether it's on Commonwealth, and this is just a place for people to put down their ideas on what proposals they want to drive, what grant programs they want to do, what are the general thoughts on the ecosystem on the DAO. So it's just a blog of sorts of forum where people can exchange ideas and see proposals. So for governance proposals, more often than not, it starts on the forum itself, right? And then people will debate back and forth, ask questions, and then the proposal authors will actually give feedback. and iterate off of that. And then it moves on to what we call an off-chain temperature check. So this is kind of like a warm-up vote, right, to signal to the proposal author whether the DAO would actually support this specific proposal or not, right? So in this stage, voting is actually off-chain, right? It doesn't cause any gas. So people are actually looking to get more feedback from the voters out there and remove all the voting blockers, like maybe gas, like maybe access to voting even, because some custodians don't actually support voting. So this is all off-chain. It's a good way to signal to the author of the proposal as to whether the DAO would actually support this proposal if it does go through, right? And then upon iteration, if it makes sense, it will actually go on-chain, right? So voting is actually on-chain for quite a few DAOs out there, right? So this is where, like, you know, the implementation code is actually put up for people to kind of review, vote on the voting the proposal rationale, the implementation steps. So once the vote actually goes through, people will actually see the execution of this proposal automatically be implemented, right? So if the vote actually does pass and it hits certain requirements, no one can essentially stop the implementation of the supported proposal of sorts. So this is kind of accentuating that autonomous aspect in DAO. Yeah, essentially, like, it's all on chain and it's automatic. So in a way, it's trustless, and you can trust that. You know, maybe you can trust is the wrong word to you, but you can actually expect that if all the requirements are met, smart contract will execute the said actions and the changes will be made accordingly without any interference or whatnot. Right, so there are many different ways that people can vote in DAOs, right? So the most standard way is a one token, one vote mechanism, right? So this is, quote unquote, I think, democratic, just because, you know, if you hold capital, it means you're skin in the game, and it means that you should have decision-making power. So it's democratic. And then there is also this concept of delegation, right? So that essentially means that you delegate your voting power to a proxy, right? So your delegate can actually wield the voting power of your tokens, but you, as the token holder, you still control the ownership of the tokens. And this is a very popular aspect in many DAOs, because, you know, voter apathy, a point that I've listed out here, is something that's very real, right? Like, you know, I'm sure a lot of you here actually hold tokens, but how many of you have actually, like, looked through governance and voted in a proposal? I'm sure it's not a lot of you. So this is where, like, delegates and delegation is very important, because there are actually quite a few active contributors that are day-to-day in the operations of the DAO. So they will be the most informed individuals to make decisions on all these different proposals. And that is why, like, delegation is actually a way to make sure that the most in context individuals actually have the highest say in how decisions are made, right? But this one token, one vote is not without its flaws, right? So again, like, voter apathy is one of them, right? Like, it's also quoted to be plutocratic, meaning to say that whales can just come in and swoop and change the way a proposal is being voted on. So we've seen this in quite a few, like, prominent proposals where, like, big VCs come in and swing the vote in their favor just because they have a bunch of tokens. And then more often than not, it's inefficient as well, right? Because you have a wide distribution of token holders. How do you actually make sure that everyone knows exactly what vote is going on, knows what proposal is going on? How do they actually go on board and vote on a specific proposal? So decision making is actually quite inefficient once a proposal actually comes up. So there are quite a few novel voting mechanisms that have emerged because of all these issues. But before I go there, these are some of the DAOs that have a traditional one token, one vote voting mechanism. So like Uniswap, Aave, Compound, as well as Nouns. Nouns, it's a one noun, one vote model, right? But it's the same concept. But yeah, to tackle some of these issues of one token, one vote, some DAOs have actually innovated on how decision making actually works. So some of them have actually come up with councils, right? So these councils are essentially elected for or people can actually qualify to be on the council if they fulfill certain requirements. And it is down to the council to actually look through the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day decision making of the DAO, right? So what this addresses is really the plutocratic aspect as well as the voter apathy aspect. And I'd say like efficiency as well, right? Because it's people who are informed that have the most context that are actually making the decisions. But some have actually questioned whether this diminishes the decentralization aspect of it, because you're centralizing decision making to the hands of say like 5 to 10 people, and there is just like an over concentration of power. What if they actually decide to go rogue one day? What if they actually collude and make bad decisions for the DAO? So there are some centralization concerns with councils, and these two DAOs have actually pioneered what councils are, right? So we have synthetics, and then we have element finance as well, right? And then we do have some DAOs which are experimenting with hybrid models, right? So Arbitrum is actually one of them. We have a one token, one vote model as well, but we also have a security council that can kind of step in and initiate any emergency actions to fix or counter any critical vulnerabilities. So they only come in when there is a big bug that will threaten the integrity of the Arbitrum chains, right? That is their only role. In traditional settings, if it's one token, one vote, if you want to fix something on the DAO level, you would still have to go through the whole governance process, and it might not be timely enough. So that's why we have this security council in place. For Optimism, they also have a split, right? So they have a one token, one vote house, and then they also have a citizen house, right? So Optimism, they don't call it the DAO, they call it the collective. The Optimism Collective is big on retroactive public goods funding. Sorry, this should be RPGF instead of RGPF. But essentially, they have this citizen house where citizens would actually be the ones deciding on which projects they want to retroactively fund. It's not going to be up to all the OP holders to decide. It's up to the citizens that are conferred citizenship to decide on these RPGF initiatives, right? And then lastly, we have Lido as well. So Lido is actually the largest liquid staking platform for Ethereum today, right? So there are Lido LDO holders that govern the Lido DAO, but because of how powerful Lido is in the whole Ethereum context, right? They're worried that they might actually vote and execute against the interests of Ethereum as a whole. So ST ETH holders, there's actually a proposal. This is not final yet, but ST ETH holders are actually discussing whether they should have like a veto for LDO decisions. So in a way, it's kind of like a checks and balances thing, but this isn't final yet to my knowledge. So yeah, we have one token, one vote. We have counter models. So these two are kind of like extreme ends. And then we have some DAOs which are experimenting with hybrid voting mechanisms. So what are some of the challenges and I'd say opportunities with DAOs today, right? There is always a concern around legitimacy, right? Like, what exactly is a DAO, right? Is it an LLC? Is it a private limited? Is it like a partnership? How do people actually get taxed? How do people actually get their benefits? So there is just like, a lack of clear and consistent legal and regulatory framework that recognizes and support the existence of DAOs and their operations, right? And then when it comes to like onboarding more and more organizations into Web3, right? There is still a stigma that like DAOs are illegitimate, that they are not as professional. So a lot of traditional organizations, big institutions, they don't actually recognize DAOs. And all of this is because there is a lack of education, there is a lack of evangelism around what DAOs are, around how Web3 actually makes the status quo better. And we need better talent in this space to help with all of these aspects and to make DAOs a little bit more legitimate. So that is on the legitimacy front. On the governance front, as I mentioned, like direct democracy often leads to plutocracy and then voter apathy. So is that actually how we want decentralized organizations to run, to be governed, right? So we need to think of better ways to we need to think about better ways when it comes to like decision making. And I'd say like no one DAO out there today has perfected this quote unquote art, right? Like every DAO is trying to experiment with different novel voting mechanisms. Each comes with their benefits and flaws, and there isn't one quote unquote industry agreed upon mechanism that is the best, right? So there is still a ton of innovation and a ton of experimentation that we need to embark on to perfect governance per se. I think another challenge and potentially opportunity to solve for is misalignment of incentives, right? So to my example earlier, like there are quite a few big token holders in the space, like the VCs, like the core teams, right? So what if one day they decide that they want to exit? What if one day they decide to vote in a certain way that would benefit them, but not benefit the DAO collectively, right? So there is always this misalignment of incentives. And this is a consistent problem that a lot of DAOs are actually looking to solve for as well. And because of the decentralized and global nature of DAOs, there are more often than not coordination inefficiencies, whether it's because of time zone differences, or whether it's because of character differences, whether it's because there isn't like a clear organization structure, there isn't no like management team, there are no managers, there are no C-suite people to kind of guide the organization. These are all challenges that we have because we want to be decentralized, right? And then there's also the security aspects, right? Like we've seen a lot of DAOs actually go through hacks, right? So because everything is underpinned by smart contracts too are susceptible to vulnerabilities and exploitations, and that is a constant worry in a lot of Web3 and DAO organizations, right? And then lastly, on community, I think like, a lot of DAOs struggle to maintain that vibe, right? To build culture. So how do you actually sustain active and engaged participation within the DAO? This is beyond like, I'd say superficial things like poker tournaments, like, I don't know, like, Christmas parties or whatnot. Like, how do you actually get a way to sustainably engage your DAO members? I think this is a key challenge that almost all DAOs face, right? So before I end off, I want to, mention some quotes here. So I'd say like, from 2021, not just 2022, 2021 onwards, all the way until last year, 2023, I'd say like we were in the midst of a bear market, right? But DAOs have essentially persistently forged ahead, and they have undergone substantial improvements in their design, functionality, and adoption. So the resurgence of DAOs, it's not just on the technical level, but also a shift in mindset towards decentralized governance, right? Like we are seeing many different individuals, small teams, and even large organization institutions, paying more attention to DAOs, trying to participate in DAOs, trying to contribute because they acknowledge the advantages of inclusive decision-making processes. And ultimately, this heightened interest has sparked more innovation and more exploration across diverse industries, both across public and private sectors. And they are now considering integrating DAOs into their own organizational and decision-making structures, right? So I want to leave you guys off with this. You don't need tokens to be a part of the DAO, right? It's not a capital barrier to entry, right? Like you can contribute as a delegate, you can be a part of a working group, you can receive grants, you can apply to grants, contribute to the DAO, and then subsequently continuously contribute. You can be an individual contributor based on your own expertise. So whether you're a coding virtuoso or whether you have a keen financial sense, you can help with financial planning, you can help with managing the finances and the treasury of a DAO. There are always different ways for you to contribute, right? Or whether you want to engage the community and help manage and help out with support, right? On the community front, there is many different different ways to engage and start contributing to a DAO, right? And ultimately, I think you can get paid or even land a full-time gig if you start participating and contributing to DAOs. This is actually like how I personally got into like Web3 and DAOs in general. I just was contributing. Of course, I still submitted like a CV and whatnot, but it was actually the contribution part that a lot of recruiting teams in Web3 actually look towards, right? Like how invested are you? Not capitally, but from a time basis, like from a mindset basis, how invested are you in the Web3 space? How invested are you in the evolution of Web3, in the evolution of cryptography and DAOs? I think that is very, very important when it comes to getting paid to contribute, right? So many different ways, again, that you can participate, right? A lot of DAOs have bounty boards where they post issues that they need people to solve for, and then they will get paid. You can go through governance and raise a treasury proposal, get funds from the DAO treasury. You can work on community management, get paid on an hourly basis or whatnot. You can get a grant. You can work as a program manager and project manager just so that you can coordinate all these different contributors. Or you can also consult, provide your expertise or advice on certain areas that the DAO might not be as proficient in. Right. So all in all, DAOs need your talent. And whether you are technical, non-technical, whether you are looking for a part-time gig or full-time gig, DAOs are always looking to get more talents in. So I'd say how you can start is, look at the Web3 space in general. Think of like a specific vertical that you're interested in. Do some research on what are the DAOs out there. Go into their Discord or discourse per se, and then look through what issues they're debating, what areas they are grappling with, and then try to find a way to contribute, try to find a way to help out, right? And who knows what might that actually spark. So DAOs await you, and I honestly hope that we get more and more participation and more people hired into DAOs this way. So that is it on my end. Thank you. Let me stop sharing and see if there are any questions. Chelsea, is it okay if I just go ahead and answer the questions?
Yeah,
I have
go
two
for it.
here. Okay, so Daryl asked, will DAOs replace corporations? I think it really depends on what industry and how that industry kind of functions, right? So I can imagine like a lot of charities, a lot of supply chains being replaced by DAOs because there is a need for transparency, there is need for trustlessness, right? So whenever there are steps where you need to backtrack, you need accountability. I think that's where like DAOs can come in because of the trustless nature of smart contracts. You essentially don't need any middlemen or not. And I'd say like, it can be a mix of both as well, right? So say, for example, a traditional organization, they want to go into like ESG, right? Or they want to diversify their treasuries or whatnot. Maybe that aspect can be DAOified, and then the other aspects of the business can still run as a traditional organization. And then I'd say like it's always an iterative process, right? Like they would need to, judge whether a DAO is actually the best function, the best structure for that specific aspect, and then iterate off of that. So Andrew is also asking if DAOs have dangerous potentials, if there are harmful agendas created by participants, what would some of them be? I don't think it's a dumb question. Some DAOs have dangerous potentials, right? So I've actually seen DAOs that are in the dark web, right? So like they want to, monopolize and get as much personal data as possible, right? So that is a bad agenda, but still people think of it as like a common objective that they all want to work towards, right? So there are always going to be bad apples out there. So I'd say like exercise your own discretion. I can't name of any. I can't think of any names off the top of my head, but yeah, I can definitely say that there are DAOs that want to proliferate the dark web. That is one example. Chelsea asked, are there any challenges related to the legal status of the DAO? For sure, right? Like for one, is a DAO actually a private limited? Is it a corporation? Is it a partnership? And then from there, how do DAOs actually get taxed, right? Do they actually have to pay corporate tax, for example, in Singapore's context? And then for people working for the DAO, right? In Singapore's context, how do DAOs actually pay CPF, for example? How do DAOs actually do benefits, right? And then how do intermediaries and organizations that you as an individual interact with, how do you actually tell them that you work for a DAO, and how do they actually adapt their processes to fit your employment with the DAO? I think those are some of the key challenges that we have to face today. Daryl asks, are there any good DAOs you personally recommend joining? Arbitrum DAO is one. But I would say maybe if you want, from a culture standpoint, you can look to, well, Noun DAO is actually bad now. I'd say Bankless DAO is actually one very flat, vibey organization. So like they talk about many different things from DeFi to NFTs or whatnot, through airdrops even. So that is actually a good, I'd say, launch pad into more intermediate DAOs. If you want to go a little bit more advanced, I could recommend you look at MakerDAO. So they are one of the most complex DAOs out there. They have many different sub DAOs, and then each sub DAO is working on their own initiative. That might be a little bit more on the advanced end. So I'd say like the Arbitrum is one you could look at because we have a good mix of different topics. It's not overly advanced, right? And then look at Bankless DAO if you want to get a good start. Justin asks, will DAOs be relevant in time-sensitive industries, seeing how decision-making process might be time-consuming due to its decentralized nature? I would say yes, for sure, right? And that is why like there are quite a few DAOs that are exploring novel decision-making mechanisms, right? So for example, for Arbitrum, we have like the Security Council, but the Security Council is only for like emergency situations, right? So how do you actually define emergency situations? And let's say, for example, if I were to quote a real life traditional example, say, for example, a trading organization, how do they actually become a DAO, right? If, they are trading on candlesticks and like it's by the minute, how do decisions actually be made? I don't think like that is actually a good use of a DAO structure, but maybe, that can be a bigger DAO, and then maybe it's just like a working group or like a small council that's making all these decisions, then that would be good for this time sensitivity piece. Cool. I think like those are all the questions. We have 3 more minutes, so if you have any other questions, feel free to plop them in the group chat. So Cherming asks, what challenges do DAOs face in terms of scalability, and how can they address these challenges as they grow in size and complexity? So I personally believe that like DAOs cannot scale if everyone is kind of like flat and everyone doesn't have a focus, right? There has to be like working groups or sub DAOs that are focused on their specific areas so that they can scale, they can focus on what they're good at, right? And then it's up to the DAO as a whole to coordinate between all of these smaller working groups and pods, so much so that they know that everyone has their own focus areas and they are executing in an expert manner on all of their focus areas. So yeah, it's like an organization, right? Like you have breakout teams. You don't have like the CEO or like the CEO looking at every single area and having expertise. They rely on their individual departments or like their individual functions to know what's best to make decisions. It's the same for DAOs. It's just that, for DAOs, it's a little bit flatter. Like there isn't like leadership, whatnot. It's just that, each function, each vertical would have like their own expertise and potentially can make decisions for that particular area on behalf of the whole DAO. Oh, good. All right, cool. So before I kind of end off, I would again encourage everyone to look into specific verticals that you guys are interested in, and then find a DAO in that specific vertical, do some research, explore their forums, explore their DAO, explore their Discord, and then see how you can contribute, because that is actually one of the ways that you can actually land a gig. It's a new way of getting jobs beyond just like submitting applications, getting your CV perfected. I'd say like quite a few recruiting teams actually don't look at CVs unless it's for a very, very technical roles. So yeah, this is one way for you to break into Web3 full time and get a gig. Last question from Andrew. So is there a possibility that DAOs track people who don't have too much expertise and they end up voting for inefficient and bad protocols? Yes, for sure. Right? Like, there are always quote unquote like smokers around, right? Like they smoke, they use ChatGPT, they don't really have the expertise, but they sound like they do, right? And then they actually don't make decisions that are in the best interest of the DAO. So it's really up to the DAO to really filter out who are actually the best people to make decisions on their behalf. So yeah, this is something that not all DAOs have kind of solved for and is a constant problem.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lee. I think that's all the time that we have for this
Mm-hmm.
session. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Our next
Thanks
session,
everyone for joining.
2 p.m. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Our next workshop will be at 2 p.m. So thank you, everyone.